Have you ever had a moment so ordinary, yet so profound, that it changed the way you saw everything? Maybe it was a quiet evening when you caught the scent of rain in the air, or the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting golden patterns on the ground. Maybe it was the laughter of a child, free and unguarded, reminding you of something you forgot along the way, how to simply be. We spend so much of our lives chasing something: success, love, meaning, believing that happiness exists somewhere out there. But what if everything we're searching for has been here all along, hidden in plain sight? In Buddhist wisdom, there's a saying, when walking, walk, when eating, eat. It's simple yet profound. It's an invitation to be fully here in this moment. Because this moment, this very breath, is the only thing we truly have. Today, we'll explore how presence can transform the way we experience life. If you've ever felt like time is slipping through your fingers, like you're always moving but never arriving, then stay with me. Let's slow down together. Let's rediscover the beauty of simply being. And if this journey speaks to you, if you long for more peace, clarity, and meaning in your everyday life, then I invite you to join me. Subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings, not just to watch, but to experience, to reflect, to grow. Because wisdom isn't something we learn once. It's something we return to again and again, like a river that never stops flowing. Chapter 1: The Power of Presence. There was a time when I believed that the faster I moved, the more I achieved, the more fulfilled I would feel. My days were packed. Meetings, deadlines, messages stacking up like waves crashing onto the shore. I wore my busyness like a badge of honor, believing that the more I did, the more my life mattered. But somewhere in the midst of it all, I stopped being. I was doing constantly, endlessly, but I wasn't really living. Then one day everything shifted. It happened on an ordinary afternoon in Vietnam. I was traveling, or at least that's what I told myself. In truth, I was running, escaping from the monotony of routine, hoping a change of scenery would fill the void I couldn't quite name. The sun was beginning its slow descent, stretching golden fingers across the sky. The air was thick with the scent of earth and water, the kind of dampness that settles into your bones, grounding you. I was walking by a quiet river when I saw him, an old monk, seated on a rock near the water's edge. He wasn't reading or chanting or meditating in the way we often picture monks. He was just there, watching the river, as if he had all the time in the world. At first, I didn't think much of it. I walked past him, preoccupied with my own thoughts. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and out of habit, I reached for it. But something made me pause. I glanced back at the monk. He hadn't moved. He was still watching the water, his face serene, as if he were witnessing something extraordinary. And that's when it hit me. I had been walking past moments like these my entire life, always rushing, always looking ahead. But here was a man who had found joy in something as simple as watching a river flow. I don't know why, but I sat down a few feet away from him. For a long while, I tried to do what he was doing, just be. But my mind resisted, churned with thoughts. How long should I sit here? Should I say something? Am I wasting time? The irony wasn't lost on me. I had nowhere to be, and yet, my mind was still racing to get somewhere. The monk turned to me and smiled. "The river doesn't hurry," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "And yet, it reaches its destination." That one sentence unraveled something deep within me. It reminded me of a Zen teaching I had heard before. When walking, walk. When eating, eat. Sounds so simple. And yet, most of us don't live this way. We eat while scrolling through our phones. We listen while planning what to say next. We walk while thinking about where we need to be. Physically, we are present, but mentally, we are absent. The monk didn't say anything else, and yet he had already said enough. I turned back to the river and watched the way it moved, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always flowing. There was no urgency, no striving, just movement, just presence. For the first time in a long time, I let myself be still. Something shifted in me that day. It wasn't a grand, earth-shattering revelation. It was something quieter, subtler. A realization that life isn't meant to be chased. It's meant to be experienced. And presence, true, full presence, isn't about doing more. It's about being fully in what you're already doing. When I returned home, I began experimenting with this idea of presence in small ways. I started with something simple, drinking tea. Before, my morning tea was just another item on my checklist. I would sip it absent-mindedly while answering emails or planning my day. But what if, instead, I drank it the way the monk watched the river? So one morning I made my tea and did nothing else. I felt the warmth of the cup in my hands. I inhaled the delicate aroma of the tea leaves, the steam curling into the air like whispers of something ancient. I took a sip, letting the liquid linger on my tongue, noticing its slight bitterness, its quiet depth. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. My tea tasted better, or rather, I tasted it for the first time. That's the thing about presence. It turns the ordinary into something sacred. It transforms simple moments into something rich, something meaningful. We tend to think happiness is something we need to find, a destination waiting for us in the future. But what if happiness has been here all along, waiting for us to slow down enough to notice it? There's a reason why mindfulness is such a core teaching in Buddhism. It's not just about meditating on a cushion or breathing in a certain way. It's about fully inhabiting your life. It's about realizing that this moment, this very moment, is the only one you ever truly have. Try it for yourself. The next time you eat, just eat. No screens, no distractions. Feel the textures of the food. Notice the flavors dancing on your tongue. The next time you walk, just walk. Listen to the rhythm of your footsteps. Feel the air against your skin. The next time you talk to someone, truly listen. Hear not just their words, but the emotions behind them. First, it might feel strange. We're so used to multitasking, to always being half here and half somewhere else. But if you stick with it, you'll notice something surprising. Life starts to feel fuller, not because anything has changed, but because you have changed. You are no longer just passing through your days. You are living them. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? Not more time, not more achievements, but the ability to fully embrace the time we already have, the life we are already living. As I reflect on that day by the river, I realize that the monk never told me how to live. He didn't give me a lecture or a list of things to do. He simply was. And in his presence, I learned something invaluable. Life is like the river. It moves whether we rush or not. It flows whether we fight it or surrender to it. The question is, will we be too busy to notice? Or will we, finally, slow down enough to sit by its edge and simply watch the water flow? Chapter 2. Embracing Impermanence. There was a time when I held on to things too tightly, moments, people, memories. I wanted to freeze time, to keep things exactly as they were, as if grasping hard enough could stop the inevitable passing of days. I used to think that if I just tried hard enough, I could hold on to happiness, keep things from slipping away. Then, one spring in Kyoto, I learned the truth about impermanence. The air smelled sweet with the scent of sakura. Everywhere, cherry blossoms had burst into bloom, soft pink petals trembling against the blue sky, so delicate they seemed almost translucent. People gathered beneath the trees, laughing, taking photos, sharing food. It was a celebration, yet beneath it all was an unspoken truth. These blossoms would be gone in a matter of days, and that's why they were so precious. I sat beneath one of the trees, watching the petals drift gently to the ground. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like if cherry blossoms lasted all year, if they never fell, never faded. And then I realized they would lose their magic. If something is always there, we stop noticing it. If we never lost things, we would never truly appreciate them. The thought unsettled me. I thought of all the times I had tried to fight change, clinging to relationships that had run their course, resisting the passing of youth, fearing the unknown future. But sitting there, watching the petals fall, I wondered, what if I let go? What if I stopped seeing impermanence as something to fear, and instead embraced it? The breeze picked up, sending a flurry of petals swirling into the air. And just like that, something in me shifted. Buddhist teachings remind us that impermanence is not a curse. It's the very nature of life. Everything changes. The sun rises, the sun sets. A wave forms in the ocean, rises to its peak, then dissolves back into the sea. We are born, we grow, we age, we pass on. Nothing in life stands still, and yet, so much of our suffering comes from our resistance to this truth. I once lost someone very dear to me. It was sudden, unexpected. One day they were there, laughing, breathing, existing. The next, they were gone. I spent months, years even, wishing I could turn back time, relive our conversations, hear their voice again, hold their hand just once more. I clung to memories so tightly that I forgot to live in the present. But time, indifferent to my grief, moved forward. The seasons changed. The world kept turning. And slowly I began to understand. Those moments we had together, they were beautiful precisely because they were finite. If they had lasted forever, I would have taken them for granted. I wouldn't have cherished them the way I do now. Impermanence is not a thief. It is a gift. It teaches us to cherish what we have while we have it, to be fully present in every moment, knowing it will never come again, to say, I love you, while we can, to appreciate the morning sunlight streaming through our window, to taste our coffee as if it were the last cup we'd ever drink. There's an old Zen story about a monk who kept a delicate porcelain cup. He loved this cup. It was beautifully crafted, perfect in every way. But each day he would remind himself, this cup is already broken. Not because he wanted to be sad, but because he wanted to appreciate it fully, knowing that one day it would shatter. And when that day came, he would not grieve, because he had already made peace with its impermanence. I think about that story often. What if we lived our lives with that same mindset? What if, instead of fearing loss, we fully embraced the beauty of what is here, now? The people we love, the experiences we have, the simple joys of everyday life. Since that day under the cherry blossoms, I've tried to practice this in small ways. Every evening, I take a moment to reflect on something beautiful from the day. Not something grand, just something simple. The warmth of my tea in the morning, a stranger's kindness, the sound of rain against my window. I hold these moments in my heart, knowing that they will never come again. And instead of sadness, I feel gratitude, because this is life, ever-changing, unfolding moment by moment, like cherry blossoms in the wind. And isn't that what makes it so precious? Chapter 3, The Freedom of Letting Go. There was a time when I carried too much, not physically, but emotionally. Regrets I couldn't shake, old wounds I kept reopening, worries that clung to me like shadows. I didn't realize how heavy they had become until one day, I found myself exhausted, not from the demands of life, but from the weight of my own mind. I remember the moment it hit me. It was late at night, one of those quiet hours when the world slows down just enough for thoughts to creep in. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying a conversation from years ago. Something I had said, something I wished I could take back. My chest tightened with the same old guilt, the same useless wishing that I could change the past. And then, out of nowhere, a thought surfaced. Why am I still carrying this? Startled me. I had held onto this regret for so long that it had become a part of me, something I carried without question. But why? What was I gaining from it? The next morning, still thinking about that question, I went for a walk. The sky was a soft gray, and the wind carried the scent of earth after rain. I found myself at a small bridge overlooking a stream, and I stood there, watching the water move, always flowing, never clinging. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and wrote down the words that had haunted me for so long. Then, with a deep breath, I let it go, watching as it floated away, dissolving into the current. It was such a simple act, and yet, something inside me shifted. The regret wasn't erased, but its grip on me loosened. I realized that letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing ourselves from the chains we no longer need to wear. Buddhist teachings often speak of attachment as the root of suffering, not just attachment to material things, but to ideas, identities, expectations. We cling to anger, to our version of how things should have been, to the idea that life owes us something. And in doing so, we weigh ourselves down with burdens that were never meant to be carried forever. There's an old Zen story about two monks traveling together. They reached a river where a woman stood, hesitating. She needed help crossing, but monks were forbidden from touching women. Without a word, one of the monks lifted her onto his back, carried her across, and set her down on the other side. They continued their journey in silence until, hours later, the other monk finally burst out, "How could you do that? We are not supposed to touch women." The first monk simply replied, "I set her down at the riverbank hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" That story stayed with me the first time I heard it, and it stays with me now. How often do we carry things long after we should have set them down? A grudge from an argument years ago, a moment of embarrassment we relive in our heads, a mistake that we keep punishing ourselves for, even when no one else remembers it. I used to believe that holding on made me strong, that if I carried my regrets, my pain, my disappointments, I was somehow honoring them. But the truth is, strength isn't in holding on, it's in knowing when to let go. I met a man once, a friend of a friend, who had lost everything in a fire. His home, his possessions, the photographs and letters and objects that had held his memories. When I asked how he had moved forward, he smiled in a way that was both sad and peaceful. "At first, I grieved for what was gone," he said. "Then I realized nothing was really mine to keep forever. I just got to borrow it for a while." That sentence stayed with me. Nothing was really mine to keep forever. We spend so much of our lives gripping tightly to things. Our past, our pain, our identities, forgetting that nothing in this world is permanent. The things we try to hold on to will slip through our fingers like water, whether we want them to or not. And when we fight that truth, we only create suffering for ourselves. Letting go isn't easy. It's not a single action but a practice, something we have to remind ourselves of over and over again. It's choosing each day to release the need for control, the need for things to be different than they are. It's learning to trust that even when we lose something, we are not lost. If you're carrying something heavy right now, regret, resentment, fear, I invite you to try something. Write it down. A sentence, a word, whatever feels right. And then release it. Burn the paper, watch it turn to ash. Tear it up and let the pieces scatter in the wind. Drop it into a river and watch it float away. It might not make the pain disappear instantly, but it's a start. A reminder to yourself that you don't have to carry this forever, that you have the choice to put it down. There is a quiet kind of freedom in letting go. It doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending things didn't hurt. It means choosing not to let the weight of the past steal the peace of the present. Like the river beneath that bridge, always moving forward, we are meant to flow. Not to stay stuck in the same place, carrying the same burdens, but to release, to soften, to trust that what is meant for us will remain, and what is not will drift away. And that, I think, is the real lesson. We are not meant to hold on to everything. We are meant to live, to breathe, to open our hands and let the wind take what no longer serves us. So take a deep breath and let it go. Chapter 4. Finding Joy in the Simple Things. There was a time when I thought happiness was something just out of reach, something I would find one day when life was finally in perfect order. I believed it was waiting for me at the end of a long road paved with achievements, financial stability, and personal success. If I just worked a little harder, fixed a few more things, became better, then surely I would arrive. But life has a way of teaching us in the gentlest yet most undeniable ways. It happened on a quiet afternoon in a small village nestled between green hills. I was traveling, though not in search of anything in particular, just wandering, taking in the sights, letting my mind breathe. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, the kind that lingers after a soft rain. In the distance, I could hear the rhythmic sound of a hammer against wood, the occasional laughter of children playing, the calls of vendors selling fresh fruit. It was one of those days when the world feels slow, and if you pay close enough attention, it almost seems to hum with a quiet kind of joy. I stopped at a roadside tea stall run by an elderly man. His face was lined with years of both hardship and kindness, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that made you feel like he knew something you didn't. He moved with a peaceful rhythm, no rush, no hurry, simply being present in the act of pouring tea. His hands were steady, his gaze calm, as if every action held meaning. I watched him for a moment, mesmerized by the effortless grace in his movements. As I took a sip of the tea, earthy, warm, with a slight sweetness, I asked, "You seem very happy. What's your secret?" He chuckled, as if the question amused him. Then, setting down the teapot, he looked at me and said, "Secret? No secret. I just love my tea." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He simply turned back to his work, humming softly. At first, I thought he had misunderstood my question. But as I sat there, watching him go about his day, I started to see what he meant. He was happy, not because he had something grand or extraordinary, but because he noticed the simple things. The warmth of the cup in his hands, the scent of tea leaves steeping, the quiet pleasure of watching people pass by, greeting them as if each meeting was a small gift. And that's when it hit me. Happiness isn't something we need to chase. It's something we need to notice. Buddhist teachings remind us that suffering often comes from attachment. Attaching happiness to future conditions, always believing that we need more before we can be content. We tell ourselves, "I'll be happy when I get that promotion, when I find the right partner, when I have more time, more money, more security." But this way of thinking turns happiness into a mirage, always on the horizon, never in our hands. But what if joy is already here, scattered throughout our days like tiny, unnoticed pearls? I once met a man who had very little by material standards. His home was modest, his possessions few, and yet he was one of the happiest people I had ever encountered. His secret? Gratitude. He found joy in the simplest things. His morning coffee, the feeling of fresh air on his face, the love of his family. When I asked if he ever wished for more, he just smiled and said, "Why would I? Everything I need, I already have." That conversation stayed with me. It made me realize that I already had so much to be happy about. I just wasn't paying attention. My mind was too busy searching for the next thing, the better thing, to appreciate what was already in front of me. I started experimenting with this idea, practicing small moments of mindfulness, pausing to savor the ordinary joys I once overlooked. The feeling of sunlight warming my skin on a cold morning, the laughter of a friend over something silly, the sound of rain tapping against my window as I curled up with a book. None of these things were grand, but when I truly noticed them, they felt like treasures. One day, I watched a little girl playing in the rain. While the adults around her rushed to find shelter, grumbling about the weather, she stretched out her arms and spun in circles, laughing as the raindrops kissed her face. She wasn't worried about getting wet or about what anyone thought. She was simply in the moment, fully alive to its joy. It made me wonder, when did we forget how to enjoy life like that? Somewhere along the way, we started believing that happiness had to be earned, that we needed a reason to feel joy. But children remind us of something important. Life itself is reason enough. Since then, I've made it a habit to find joy in small things. Every evening, before going to bed, I take a moment to reflect on 3 things that brought me happiness that day. It doesn't have to be big, just small, simple joys. Maybe it's the aroma of fresh bread in the morning, or the way a stranger held the door open for me, or the way the sky turned pink and gold as the sun set. This practice rewires the brain to see joy instead of waiting for it. And something magical happens when you start noticing joy. It multiplies. The more you appreciate, the more you receive. Life stops feeling like a race and starts feeling like a gift. So if you've been waiting for happiness, if you've been holding off, thinking that you'll finally be at peace when things fall into place, let me tell you this, it's already here, right now, in this moment, in the breath you just took, in the quiet between words, in the rhythm of your heartbeat. You don't need to chase happiness. You just need to notice it. As you sit here, listening to these words, take a deep breath. Feel the air fill your lungs, the weight of your body resting against the earth. Notice the sounds around you, the soft hum of the world continuing on, the quiet rhythm of your own heart. This moment is fleeting, and that's what makes it beautiful. We often think peace is something we need to find, something waiting for us in the future. But what if peace has been waiting for us, right here, right now? Like the river flowing steadily to the ocean, life moves forward whether we rush or not. The question is, will we be too busy to notice? Or will we finally allow ourselves to sit by its edge, to breathe, to simply be? If today's reflections resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share a moment of presence you've experienced recently in the comments below. Let's learn from each other, remind each other of what truly matters. And if you feel called to continue this journey, join our growing community at Lotus Light Teachings. Subscribe, stay present, and let's walk this path together, one mindful step at a time. Until next time, may you find peace in the simplest moments. And may you always remember the present is a gift.